5 o'clock in the morning at Fort Moore, Alabama. My world was condensed into the sharp scent of kiwi shoe polish and the rhythmic, hypnotic friction of a horsehair brush against the black leather of my tactical boots. That disciplined silence shattered when the phone on the cold metal table began to vibrate violently, sliding toward the edge. The screen lit up, displaying a name that hadn't called me at this hour in 10 years. Commander Arthur. The way I saved my grandfather's number. My hand froze in midair, knuckles turning white from the grip on the brush. My stomach twisted, a familiar nausea before a deployment into a combat zone. My breath caught in my throat. He never broke the rules of time. Had he fallen? Had his weak heart finally given out? I answered, my voice raspy but steady. Sergeant Jada Mosley, reporting. But the voice on the other end wasn't a dying wheeze. It was sharp, commanding, a tone I had never heard from the pensioner living on Social Security. Get home, now. The whole family squad will be there. Screening operation commences. He hung up. Why would a poor old man, despised by his descendants for a lifetime, suddenly order an assembly? And what the hell was waiting for me in Birmingham? A funeral or a battlefield? I steered my battered Ford F-150 into the driveway of the two-story colonial house in the suburbs of Birmingham. The gravel crunched under my tires, a harsh, honest sound that felt completely out of place amongst the silent, gleaming fleet parked ahead of me. A black Mercedes, a silver BMW, and a cherry-red Range Rover blocked the entrance. I knew for a fact every single one of them was leased. It was a showroom of debt, polished to a high shine to impress neighbors they didn't even like. My mother, Nancy, opened the front door before I even cut the engine. She didn't step out to hug me. She stood in the frame, her eyes scanning me from my dusty tactical boots up to my olive drab t-shirt. Her expression wasn't one of maternal warmth. It was the look someone gives when they spot a nasty stain on an expensive rug. I told you to change, Jada, she hissed as I walked up the concrete steps. Aunt Patricia is here. Can you please not let everyone think we have an unemployed daughter playing soldier? It's embarrassing. The words hit me with the precision of a sniper round, but I didn't flinch. 10 years in the Army teaches you to absorb impact without breaking formation. I am a sergeant, Mom, I said, my voice flat, holding my ground. This is a uniform, not a pair of coveralls. She rolled her eyes, already turning her back on me to inspect a microscopic smudge on the doorframe. Just try not to embarrass us, and wipe those boots before you step on the hardwood. Inside, the air was thick with the cloying scent of Chanel No. 5, masking the smell of mediocrity. The living room looked like a catalog page, pristine, beige, and utterly soulless. My father, Robert, stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch he likely couldn't afford. He was animatedly explaining some new cryptocurrency scheme to my cousin Ethan. It is all about the yield farming, son, Dad said, chest puffed out. Passive income, that is how the big boys play. You leverage the debt to buy the coin. Ethan, a 20-something with bleached tips and zero ambition, nodded while admiring his pristine sneakers. For sure, Uncle Rob. These Jordans were like $500 on resale. Gotta spend money to look money, right? I walked past them, my heavy boots thudding softly on the rug. Dad gave me a curt nod, the kind you give a delivery driver you want to leave quickly, then turned back to Ethan. No, how are you? No, thank you for your service. I was a ghost in the house I grew up in, a specter of reality haunting their fantasy life of easy riches. Then a distinct sound cut through the room's chatter, the sputtering, wheezing cough of an engine that had seen better decades. A car horn, weak and raspy, honked outside. Dad's face twisted in annoyance. He rushed to the window, peeling back the curtain. Oh God, the old man is here. I hope he did not park that rust bucket next to my Merc. What will the neighbors think? A moment later, the front door opened again. Grandpa Arthur stepped in. He was leaning heavily on a wooden cane, wearing a faded khaki jacket that I recognized from Goodwill. The scent of Tiger Balm and old peppermint candy drifted in with him, instantly battling the expensive perfume. Aunt Patricia, sitting on the plush velvet sofa, visibly recoiled. She waved her manicured hand in front of her nose, not even trying to hide her disgust. "Dad," she whined, her voice high and grating. "Could you not have showered before coming? Honestly, it smells like a nursing home in here now." Nobody moved. Robert, Nancy, Patricia, Ethan. They all stayed frozen, terrified that the poverty might be contagious if they touched him. They were terrified of dirtying their brand-name outfits. I was the only one who moved. I crossed the room in 3 long strides and took his elbow to support his weight. His arm felt frail under the fabric, like a bird's wing. But when he looked at me, his eyes were sharp, devoid of the cloudiness I expected. "Welcome to the area of operations, Commander," I whispered. He squeezed my hand, a secret signal. "At ease, Sergeant." We guided him to a stiff wooden chair in the corner, far away from the good furniture. He sat there, an island of unwanted history in a sea of shallow ambition. Arthur cleared his throat. The sound was wet and rattled. I do not think I have much time left," he said, his voice trembling with a frailty that seemed almost rehearsed. "I wanted to use my entire life savings, to invite the whole family to Hawaii." The room went dead silent. You could hear the ice melting in Dad's scotch glass. Then the transformation happened. It was visceral, immediate, and absolutely disgusting. Dad's sneer melted into a predatory grin. Mom, who had just insulted his hygiene, practically sprinted across the room to kneel beside him. "Oh, Dad!" Nancy gushed, grabbing his calloused hand with her claws. "You are so generous. Hawaii? Are we talking the Four Seasons? The one on Maui?" "Whatever is best," Arthur murmured, looking down at the floor. "I can look up flights right now," Ethan shouted, phone already in hand, the $500 shoes forgotten. "First class has those lie-flat seats, Grandpa. You would need that for your back, right?" "We deserve a vacation," Aunt Patricia added, suddenly forgetting the smell of tiger balm. "It has been so stressful lately with the bills." They swarmed him. They talked over him, discussing resorts, rental convertibles, and shopping sprees. Not one of them asked about his health. Not one asked, "What do you mean you do not have much time?" To them, he wasn't a dying father. He was a broken ATM that needed to be smashed open for the last few bills. I stood back, leaning against the wall, watching the feeding frenzy. I felt a wave of nausea, remembering the verse from Proverbs chapter 15. "The greedy bring ruin to their households." I looked at Grandpa Arthur. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at me, over their heads. His trembling had stopped. There was a cold, hard glint in his eye that I had never seen before. It was the look of a man who had just confirmed the enemy's position. I realized then that I wasn't going on a vacation. I was deploying. My family wasn't family anymore. They were hostiles. And my mission was to ensure the commander completed his final operation, whatever the hell it was. "I am in," I whispered to myself, watching my father calculate flight costs on his phone. "Let's go to war." Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was a chaotic hive of motion, a sprawling beast of glass and steel. My family moved through the terminal like an entourage of B-list celebrities, their heels clicking sharply on the polished terrazzo floors. They dragged an armada of Louis Vuitton rolling suitcases, monogrammed, shiny, and likely purchased on a credit card that was maxed out 3 months ago. Trailing 20 feet behind them was Grandpa Arthur. He was struggling. His posture was crooked, his shoulder dipped low under the weight of an ancient, olive-drab canvas duffel bag. It was the kind of luggage that had not been sold since the 70s. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his breath coming in shallow rasps. "Pick up the pace, old man!" My father, Robert, shouted over his shoulder, not even breaking his stride. He had one hand in his pocket, the other holding a Starbucks latte. "We are going to miss the flight because of you." He did not offer to help. Neither did Ethan, whose biceps were purely decorative, sculpted for Instagram selfies rather than actual labor. The blood rushed to my face, hot and sharp. I stopped, turned around, and jogged back to Arthur. I gently pried the heavy strap from his trembling fingers. "I have got it, Commander," I said softly, swinging the bag onto my own shoulder. It was heavy, suspiciously heavy for a week in Hawaii. Arthur looked at me, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Thank you, Sergeant," he whispered, catching his breath. "Just remember, Jada, the heaviest backpack always holds the most valuable lesson." We reached the TSA security checkpoint. It was the great equalizer, or so I thought. "Shoes off, belts off, laptops out," the TSA agent barked. My family breezed through the pre-check lane, which they had paid for with Arthur's money. But Arthur and I were in the standard lane. He was slow. His arthritic fingers fumbled with the buckle of his leather belt. He struggled to untie his worn-out dress shoes. Behind us, a businessman in a suit let out a loud, impatient sigh, checking his Rolex. I knelt down to untie Arthur's laces. As I did, I felt a shadow fall over us. I looked up and saw Olivia and Ethan standing on the other side of the glass partition. They weren't waiting anxiously. They were holding up their iPhones. Olivia was giggling, doing a mock sad face for the camera. I could practically see the caption she was typing. POV. When you travel with a caveman. OMG, so embarrassing. Hashtag boomer problems. Hashtag holiday disaster. They were turning his physical pain into digital entertainment. I stood up slowly. I locked eyes with Olivia. I didn't yell. I just gave her the look I used on new recruits who flagged me with a loaded weapon. A look that promised absolute destruction. Olivia flinched. She lowered the phone, her smile faltering. But I knew it was too late. The story was already posted. When we finally got through the scanner, a TSA supervisor was waiting. He was a large man with graying hair. He looked at Arthur's ID, then looked at Arthur. He paused for a long second, his eyes widening slightly. He opened his mouth as if to salute or say something formal, but Arthur gave a microscopic shake of his head. The supervisor closed his mouth, nodded respectfully, and handed the ID back with 2 hands. "Have a safe flight, sir," the agent said, with a gravity that didn't match the setting. My family, busy checking their likes on TikTok, missed the entire exchange. At the boarding gate, the final humiliation was revealed. Robert stood with a fan of boarding passes. "Okay, listen up," he announced. "First class for me, Nancy, Patricia, Frank, and the kids. We need the legroom to rest up for the itinerary." He flicked 2 tickets toward me. They fluttered down like dead leaves. "These are for you and the old man. Economy. Row 42. Way in the back." Robert smirked, adjusting his blazer. "He is small. He does not need the space. Plus, I saved $3,000 doing this. Smart investing, right?" Arthur had paid for every single ticket. He had paid for the champagne they were about to drink. And they were shoving him into the cattle car. My fists clenched at my sides. I opened my mouth to tear Robert apart, but Arthur's hand clamped onto my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Silence," he ordered softly. "Let them go." We boarded last. To get to row 42, we had to walk through the first-class cabin. It was the walk of shame. I saw my mother sipping a mimosa, laughing at something Aunt Patricia said. My father was already reclined, an eye mask on his forehead. They didn't even look up as Arthur shuffled past them, his cane tapping rhythmically on the carpet. They acted as if we didn't exist. 6 hours later, we landed in Maui. The heat hit us like a physical blow, thick with the scent of plumeria and jet fuel. A stretch limousine, long and white, was idling at the curb. The driver held a sign that said, "Hanot Family." My family shrieked with delight, rushing forward like a swarm of locusts. They piled in, fighting for the best seats near the minibar. I guided Arthur to the curb. He was exhausted, his face pale gray. As I reached for the door handle, Uncle Frank blocked the way. He stood inside the car, filling the frame. "Hey, bad news," Frank said, not looking sorry at all. "The car is full, too many bags. It is going to be tight." He looked at Arthur, then at me. "Jida, you know how to use Uber, right? Just grab a cheap car and meet us at the hotel. It will save us having to sit on each other's laps." "Are you kidding me?" I snapped. "This is his car. He paid for it." "And he would want us to be comfortable," Frank said, and he slammed the heavy door shut in my face. The tinted window rolled up. I saw my mother inside, raising a toast. The limousine peeled away from the curb, disappearing into the tropical traffic, leaving an 80-year-old man standing on the hot asphalt in the blazing sun. My heart broke. Not for me, but for the sheer cruelty of it. I looked at Arthur, expecting to see tears. If your blood is boiling right now watching this betrayal, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments below. If this was your grandfather, would you let that limo drive away? Or would you have dragged Uncle Frank out by his collar? I want to know whose side you are on. But Arthur wasn't crying. He watched the white limousine fade into the distance. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped his face. Then, he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a cold, calculating smile. The smile of a tactician who had just successfully lured the enemy into a kill box. Note for the log, Arthur whispered, his voice steady as steel. Enemy formation has dispersed. Phase 1 is complete. Prepare for Phase 2. The lobby of the Four Seasons Resort was a cathedral of open-air luxury, smelling of expensive orchids and sea breeze. My parents, Robert and Nancy, were currently screaming at the front desk manager, their voices echoing off the marble floors. They were fighting over the square footage of the Ocean View Suite, demanding an upgrade they hadn't paid for. Finally, having secured their victory, my father turned to me. He tossed a plastic key card through the air. It hit my chest and fell to the floor. I had to bend down to pick it up. Your grandfather's room is on the first floor, Robert said, checking his reflection in a glass pane. Garden view. We are in the penthouse on the 8th floor. Do not disturb us unless it is an emergency. In hotel speak, garden view is a polite euphemism. The reality was a damp, dark room at the very back of the property. When I opened the curtains, there was no garden. There was the concrete wall of the loading dock, a row of overflowing dumpsters, and the deafening hum of the hotel's industrial air conditioning units. The room smelled of mildew and industrial cleaner. It was a storage closet with a bed. Arthur sat on the edge of the mattress. The springs creaked loudly. He placed his cane between his knees and looked at the wall. I felt a surge of hot shame, not for the room, but for the people whose diapers he had changed, whose college tuitions he had paid, treating him like luggage to be stored in the basement. I am sorry, Commander, I said, my voice thick. I will go back up there. I will make them switch. Arthur shook his head. He looked around the cramped space, listening to the roar of the generator outside. It is fine, Sergeant, he said, his voice raspy but calm. Compared to a sandbag bunker at Khe Sanh in 1968, this is a palace. At least the roof does not leak. By the time we got settled, my family had vanished. They had scattered like shrapnel. My mother and Aunt Patricia were at the spa, getting $300 facials. My father and Uncle Frank were on the golf course. The cousins were shopping at the luxury boutiques in the lobby. I checked my phone. Olivia had just posted a story on Instagram. It was a selfie of the whole group, minus Arthur and me, raising cocktails by the infinity pool. The caption read, "Family is everything. So blessed to be here. #Hawaii Life." It was a lie wrapped in a filter. I found Arthur sitting alone on a bench at the far edge of the resort property, away from the guests in their designer swimwear. He was wearing a faded floral shirt that hung loosely on his frame. He was staring out at the Pacific Ocean, his eyes watery behind his smudged glasses. A couple walked past us, young, rich, beautiful. The woman pulled her cover-up tighter around her body and whispered loudly to her husband, "Is that man homeless? How did he get onto the property?" They looked at my grandfather like he was a stain on their perfect vacation. I sat down next to him. I didn't say a word. I gently took the glasses off his face. I used the hem of my t-shirt to wipe away the salt spray and the smudges. I put them back on him. We were two lonely islands, drifting in a sea of shallow vanity. At 1 o'clock, Arthur's stomach growled. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. "Mom, where is everyone eating? Grandpa is hungry." The background noise on the line was deafening, clinking silverware and smooth jazz. "Oh, Jida," Nancy said, her voice slurring slightly from day drinking. We are at the seafood bistro, the one with the white tablecloths. Look, just get the old man a sandwich or something. He wants to eat with his family, I said, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. It is not a good idea, she snapped. We are ordering lobster thermidor. It is messy. You know how his hands shake. He drops food on his shirt. It is unappetizing. We do not want him to embarrass us in front of the other guests. Just handle it. The line went dead. I squeezed the phone so hard I heard the case crack. I wanted to march into that restaurant and flip the table. But I looked at Arthur, at his tired shoulders, and I knew a scene wasn't what he needed. I walked to a small convenience stand near the beach entrance. I bought 2 hot dogs wrapped in foil and 2 cans of soda. Total cost, $12. We sat on a wooden bench facing the ocean. The wind whipped our hair. I unwrapped the hot dog. The bun was slightly stale, and the mustard was cheap yellow paste. Arthur took a bite. He chewed slowly, his jaw clicking. He swallowed and turned to me with a genuine, crinkled smile. This is delicious, he said. Thank you, JD. That smile broke me. It shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. He was grateful for a stale hot dog, while his son was gorging on lobster paid for with his money. That night, the noise from the loading dock made it impossible to sleep. I sat in a chair by the door, keeping watch. Around 2 a.m, Arthur woke up. He sat up in the darkness, looking at me. Jida, he whispered. Why are you here? You are young. You should be out at the clubs with your cousins. Why are you suffering in this hole with a dying old man? I stood up and walked to his bedside. I tucked the thin blanket around his feet. Because the army taught me a code, Commander, I said, my voice steady in the dark. I will never leave a fallen comrade. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. And because you are the only one who remembered my birthday last year, and the year before that. Arthur went silent. For a long time, the only sound was the humming of the air conditioner. Then I saw a single tear track its way through the deep wrinkles of his cheek. He brushed it away with a rough hand. When he looked up again, the sadness was gone. In the dim light, his eyes were no longer the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a tactician who had finished assessing the battlefield. Get some sleep, Sergeant, he whispered, his voice hard as flint. Prepare your gear. Tomorrow, we launch the counterattack. La Pearl was the kind of restaurant that smelled of old money and silent judgment. Crystal chandeliers, massive and dripping with diamonds of glass, hung from the vaulted ceiling. The waiters moved like ghosts in tuxedos, speaking in hushed French accents. My family, however, had no concept of hushed. We sat at a large circular table in the dead center of the room, loud as a construction site. My father, Robert, snapped his fingers at the sommelier. Bring us the Chateau Margaux, he announced, voice booming so the neighboring tables could hear. The $2,000 bottle, and put it on the corporate card. I figure if the IRS is going to audit me next year, I might as well drink their money now, right? He laughed a loud, honking laugh. My mother and Uncle Frank joined in, clinking their glasses. They were drunk on arrogance. In the corner of this display sat Grandpa Arthur. He looked painfully out of place. He was wearing his best flannel shirt, the red and black plaid faded from years of washing. Amidst the sea of silk evening gowns and Italian suits, he looked like a relic from a forgotten world. He held the leather-bound menu close to his face, his hands trembling slightly. His eyesight was failing, and the dim, romantic lighting made the cursive French text impossible to read. I cannot make out these words, Arthur whispered, squinting. Olivia, sitting across from him, snatched the menu out of his hands. Oh, give it here, she sighed, rolling her eyes at Ethan. You would not know what escargot was if it bit you, Grandpa. You're used to, what? Canned beans? She turned to the waiter, flashing a fake, sugary smile. Just bring him the pumpkin soup, pureed. Like, for a baby, he does not have the teeth for steak. The whole table erupted in laughter. My mother covered her mouth with a napkin, giggling. Oh, Olivia, you are terrible. I gripped my silver fork so hard the metal dug into my palm. My knuckles turned white. I was calculating the trajectory across the table, imagining flipping the entire spread onto their laps. But I held my breath. Hold the line, Sergeant, I told myself. Wait for the signal. Halfway through the meal, Arthur stood up. Excuse me, he mumbled. Restroom. He grabbed his cane and shuffled away from the table. The floor was polished marble, slick and unforgiving. As he navigated around a decorative display in the center of the room, a magnificent 6-foot tower of champagne glasses stacked in a pyramid, his bad knee buckled. He lurched forward. He tried to catch himself, but his cane slipped. He fell hard, his shoulder slamming directly into the base of the glass pyramid. Crash! The sound was deafening, like a bomb going off in a library. Hundreds of crystal glasses shattered at once. Champagne exploded outward in a frothy wave. The entire restaurant went instantly, terrifyingly silent. Arthur lay sprawled on the wet marble, amidst the shards. A jagged piece of glass had sliced his forearm. Bright red blood began to mix with the golden champagne on the white floor. "Oh my God!" my mother shrieked. But she didn't rush to help. She grabbed her menu and held it up to hide her face. "This is so humiliating. Don't look at him. Everyone is staring at us." "Useless old man," my father hissed through clenched teeth, slamming his hand on the table. "He cannot even walk straight." Not one of them moved. They sat there, paralyzed by their own vanity, terrified of being associated with the clumsy old man on the floor. The maitre d' ran over, his face pale. "Monsieur, are you all right?" My father stood up then, but not to help. He stood up to distance himself. He marched over to where Arthur lay, his expensive Italian loafers splashing in the puddle of wine and blood. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. He ripped out a single $100 bill. He crumpled it in his fist until it was a tight, wrinkled ball. Then, with a sneer of pure contempt, he threw the money at his own father. The ball of paper hit Arthur in the chest and rolled into the wet mess on the floor. "Take that for the damage and get back to your room," Robert screamed, his face turning a violent shade of red. "You ruined our entire evening. Why do you have to be such a burden? Why don't you just die and save us all the trouble?" The air left the room. The cruelty of that sentence hung in the silence like toxic smoke. That was it. The safety on my internal weapon clicked off. I stood up. I kicked my heavy chair back so hard it fell over with a loud clatter. I marched through the puddle, glass crunching under my boots, and stepped between my father and my grandfather. I stood at parade rest, shielding Arthur's prone body. I looked Robert straight in the eye. I didn't see a father. I saw a target. "You just violated the most basic rule of humanity," I said, my voice low and icy, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Your action was despicable. You are not worthy of the name Mosley." Robert froze. His eyes bulged. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by his own daughter, and certainly not in front of an audience of millionaires. His humiliation morphed instantly into blind rage. "How dare you lecture me?" he roared. He pulled his arm back and swung. Smack! The slap caught me square on the cheekbone. It was a wild, desperate strike, but it carried the weight of a grown man's fury. My head snapped to the side. A sharp metallic taste flooded my mouth, blood from where my tooth cut my inner cheek. The room gasped. I stood perfectly still. My face burned, 5 red fingerprints instantly rising on my skin. With my training, I could have blocked that strike. I could have grabbed his wrist, hyperextended his elbow, and driven him into the floor before he blinked. I could have ended him. But I didn't. I took the hit. I took it like a soldier taking shrapnel for a civilian. I slowly turned my head back to face him. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't scream. I looked at him with eyes that were absolute zero. Robert was panting, his hand still raised, trembling now. He looked at me, waiting for fear, but he found none. I spat a mouthful of bloody saliva onto the floor next to his polished shoes. "Noted," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "We are finished here." I turned my back on him, the ultimate sign of dismissal. I knelt down, ignoring the glass cutting into my knees, and helped the commander to his feet. We walked out of the restaurant, leaving Robert standing alone in the wreckage of his own ego. I guided Grandpa Arthur out of the restaurant, my arm wrapped firmly around his waist. Blood from his arm dripped onto the pristine white marble of the lobby floor, leaving a trail of red dots behind us. Behind us, the heavy mahogany doors of La Pearl burst open. My father, mother, and the rest of the pack spilled out, their faces twisted with indignation. "Get back here!" Robert screamed, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "You ungrateful little brat! Do not walk away when I am speaking to you. I will kick you out of the house. You hear me? You are homeless as of tonight. And take that senile old fool with you," Aunt Patricia shrieked, her heels clicking furiously as they chased us. "He ruined my silk dress." They were so consumed by their own rage, so blinded by their own self-importance, that they didn't notice the atmosphere in the grand lobby had shifted. It was subtle at first, then undeniable. As we moved toward the center of the room, the chatter at the front desk stopped. The bellhops, who had been laughing near the luggage carts, suddenly stood at rigid attention. The concierge dropped the phone he was holding. A hush fell over the massive space. It wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of respect. Then, a man in a black tailcoat with a gold name tag reading, "General Manager," came sprinting across the floor. He was breathless, his face pale with panic. My father, seeing the manager, assumed he had an ally. He puffed out his chest, pointing an accusatory finger at Arthur. "Hey, you, manager," Robert barked. "Get your security over here. Throw this old beggar out on the street. He's bleeding all over your expensive floor. He's disturbing the guests. I want him gone." The general manager didn't even look at Robert. He ran right past my father as if he were invisible. He skidded to a halt directly in front of Arthur. To my family's absolute shock, the manager didn't grab Arthur. Instead, he bowed. It was a deep, 90-degree bow of absolute subservience. "Chairman Hanot," the manager gasped, his voice trembling. "Sir, we did not know you were dining downstairs. I am so terribly sorry for the incident. Are you injured? Shall I call the paramedics?" The world seemed to freeze. Chairman," my mother stammered, the color draining from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. Slowly, deliberately, Arthur reached out and removed my hand from his waist. He took a step forward, away from me. As he did, a transformation occurred that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The hunched shoulders straightened. The trembling in his legs ceased. The frail, confused old man vanished. In his place stood a lion. Arthur stood to his full height, which was over 6 feet. He rolled his neck, cracking the stiffness. He wiped the blood from his arm with a handkerchief, his movements precise and powerful. His eyes, previously cloudy and wandering, locked onto my father with the intensity of a laser sight. "Robert," Arthur said. His voice was no longer a wheeze. It was a deep baritone that commanded the entire room. "I thought this trip would heal this family. I thought the ocean air might cure your greed." He shook his head slowly. "But I was wrong. I did not raise children. I raised hyenas." Arthur snapped his fingers. The sound was like a gunshot. "Manager Henderson." "Yes, Mr. Chairman." "Show them where they are standing." The manager hurried to a massive velvet curtain hanging on the far wall, a feature my family had walked past a dozen times without noticing. He pulled the heavy gold cord. The curtain swooshed upward. Revealed underneath was a 10-foot oil painting. It depicted a younger Arthur Hanot, standing proudly in a military uniform, shaking hands with a president. Behind him, in the painting, was a map of the United States, with golden pins marking locations from New York to San Francisco. At the bottom of the frame, a brass plaque read, "Arthur Hanot, founder and chairman, Hanot Luxury Group." My family stared at the painting. Then, they stared at the old man in the flannel shirt. Then, back at the painting. The realization hit them with the force of a freight train. The man they had humiliated, the man they had treated like a broken ATM, owned the floor they were standing on. He owned the roof over their heads. He owned the champagne they had just spilled. "You," Robert gasped, his mouth hanging open. "You You have money? You are rich? Arthur didn't answer him. He turned to the manager, his face devoid of mercy. Manager Henderson, these people have been trespassing on my property, Arthur declared, his voice cold and judicial. Effective immediately, their reservation is terminated. Wait! Dad! Nancy screamed, rushing forward, her hands shaking. Dad, wait! We didn't know. It was a joke. We were just stressed. Arthur held up a hand. The credit card I linked to your accounts? The one you used to buy those bags and that jewelry? Yes, Aunt Patricia whispered, tears of terror welling in her eyes. It is locked. Declined. You will have to return every single item, or you will face theft charges. Panic erupted. Ethan dropped his phone. Olivia looked like she was going to be sick. And one more thing, Arthur said, looking at the security team that had silently gathered around us. 4 massive guards in dark suits stood ready. Get them out of my sight, Arthur ordered. Remove them from my barracks. Dad, no, please. Robert fell to his knees, grabbing at Arthur's pant leg. We have nowhere to go. Our flights aren't for 3 days. Dad! Arthur stepped back, letting Robert grasp at empty air. Security, the general manager barked. The guards moved in. They didn't use excessive force, but they were firm. 2 of them hoisted my father up by his armpits. Another took my mother by the elbow. Let me go! Do you know who I am? Robert screamed, kicking his legs like a child. Yes, sir, the guard said calmly. You are a trespasser. I stood next to my grandfather, watching the scene unfold. My family was dragged across the beautiful marble floor, their screams of, "We are sorry and give us another chance," echoing until they reached the revolving doors. The guards shoved them into the glass compartments. The doors spun. And just like that, they were ejected onto the humid street, locked out of the air-conditioned paradise they thought they deserved. Arthur watched them go. He didn't smile. He just let out a long, heavy sigh, the weight of the deception finally lifting off his shoulders. General Manager, Arthur said softly. Yes, sir? Bring the sergeant a medical kit for her face, and bring me a bottle of the Chateau Margaux, the real one. 72 hours after our expulsion from paradise, we were back in the humid, suffocating heat of Alabama. Grandpa Arthur did not return to a mansion. He insisted on going back to his small, weathering wooden house on the edge of town. But this time, the dynamic had shifted. The house was no longer a place of decay. It was a command post. Attorney Harlan, a man with a suit as sharp as a razor blade, sat at the kitchen table. Outside the chain-link fence, my family, Robert, Nancy, Patricia, and the rest, were huddled like wet rats. They had driven straight from the airport, desperate, banging on the gate, demanding to speak to Daddy. Arthur sat by the window, hidden by the blinds. Read the draft, Harlan, he ordered. Make sure the window is open just a crack. Harlan cleared his throat and began to read the document aloud, his voice projecting into the humid afternoon air. This was the preliminary will, a tactical decoy Arthur had drawn up to test the enemy's perimeter defenses. I, Arthur Hanott, being of sound mind, hereby declare my intentions. To my granddaughter, Jida Mosley, I bequeath this property and a yearly stipend of $1 million for her caretaking services. The remainder of my estate, including all corporate assets and holdings, shall be liquidated and donated entirely to the veterans of foreign wars and the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. To my children, I leave nothing. $1 million a year. To a billionaire, it was pocket change. But to my parents, drowning in credit card debt and leased luxury cars, it was a lifeline. It was the difference between bankruptcy and survival. The reaction from beyond the fence was instantaneous and feral. That little witch, my mother's voice shrieked, piercing the air. She brainwashed him. Do you hear me? She drugged him. Open this gate, my father roared, shaking the metal chain link until it rattled violently. That is my money. That is my inheritance. She is a manipulator. She is using military psychological warfare on a senile old man. They didn't care that Arthur was dying. They didn't care about the billions going to charity. They only saw the $1 million flowing into my pocket, and it drove them into a frenzy of jealousy. They realized yelling wouldn't work. So, they changed tactics. They deployed the weapon of the modern coward: social media. That evening, my phone began to buzz. Then it vibrated. Then it exploded with notifications. Olivia had gone to work. She took the videos she had filmed in Hawaii, the ones where she mocked Arthur, and she re-edited them. She applied a grainy, gray filter to make everything look sinister. She added sad, slow piano music in the background. She took the clip from the airport where I took the heavy bag from Arthur. In her edit, she cut out the part where I helped him. She only showed me grabbing the strap and pulling. With the caption, "She forces him to carry her luggage. Elder abuse." She took the clip from the restaurant where I stood between Arthur and my father. She cut it to make it look like I was lunging at Robert aggressively. She posted it to TikTok with the caption, "The truth exposed. My cousin, Sergeant Jada Mosley, is isolating my grandfather, manipulating his dementia to steal his fortune. She is dangerous. We are terrified. Please help us save him. Hashtag justice for grandpa. Hashtag Jada exposed." The internet, always hungry for a villain, swallowed the bait whole. Within 4 hours, the video had 2 million views. The comments rolled in like a tidal wave of sewage. Disgrace to the uniform. Lock her up and throw away the key. I hope she rots in hell for hurting an old man. My personal information was doxed. My address, my phone number, my email, everything was posted online. By the next morning, my house was under siege. News vans were parked on the lawn, their satellite dishes pointed at our windows like mortars. Someone threw a carton of eggs at the front door. Red paint was splashed across the driveway, spelling out 2 words: Gold Digger. Then came the call I feared the most. Sergeant Mosley, the voice of my commanding officer, barked over the phone. "I have 3 reporters at the base gate asking why I employ a woman who abuses the elderly. CID is opening an inquiry. Until this is cleared up, you are placed on administrative leave. Do not come to post." My career, my honor, my entire identity, stripped away by a 20-second video clip edited by a teenager. I sat on the floor of the living room, the curtains drawn tight against the flashing cameras outside. The room was dark. I held my service pistol in my lap. I ejected the magazine. I pulled back the slide to clear the chamber. I set the ammunition aside. I practiced the disassembly over and over again. Click, slide, snap. The mechanical rhythm calmed my racing heart. I wanted to run outside. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to show them the bruises on my face where my father had slapped me. But Arthur put a hand on my shoulder. He was sitting in his armchair, watching the news coverage of his own victimhood with a stoic expression. "Do not engage, Sergeant," he whispered. "Do not explain yourself to the enemy. Silence is the loudest noise you can make right now. Let them scream. Let them exhaust their ammunition." I know how frustrating this is. To see the truth twisted, to see the good guys punished while the liars play the victim. It makes you want to punch a wall, doesn't it? If you stand with Jada against this wave of fake news and bullying, smash that like button right now. And comment, hold the line below so I know you are still with us. I took a deep breath. I put the gun back in its case. "Radio silence," I said to the darkness. "Understood." I would not break. I would stay in this bunker, ignoring the eggs hitting the siding and the hate mail flooding my inbox. I would protect the commander until his final breath. And when the dust settled, they would see that they hadn't trapped a victim. They had trapped themselves in a cage with a lioness who was just waiting for the gate to open. Commander Arthur Hainaut passed away on a Tuesday night, right as a severe thunderstorm rolled across the Alabama state line. The wind howled against the siding of the small wooden house, rattling the window panes like an artillery barrage. But inside, it was quiet. The only light came from a single bedside lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I sat by his bed, holding his hand. His skin was paper-thin and cool to the touch. His breathing had slowed to a shallow, rhythmic rasp. There were no dramatic last words about buried treasure or corporate secrets. There was no movie script ending. He simply squeezed my hand, a weak pressure from calloused fingers that had built an empire and then carried a duffel bag to protect his family. "Jada," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the thunder, "you are my pride." And then the grip loosened. The chest stopped rising. The commander was gone. The house fell into a terrifying silence. I did not cry. A soldier does not weep when she is still on duty, and my watch was not over yet. I stood up, straightened my back, and went to the closet. I pulled out his old service uniform, the one he loved, not the expensive suits of a chairman. I spent the next hour preparing him, buttoning the jacket with precision, smoothing the collar. I treated his body with the reverence of a national treasure. The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with unshed rain. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the group chat titled Mosley Family. I typed the message with trembling fingers. "Grandpa passed away last night. The funeral service will be held at 10 o'clock in the morning this Thursday at St. Jude's Chapel. Please come home to see him one last time." I hit send. I stared at the screen, watching the little read receipts pop up. 3 minutes passed. Then the bubbles appeared. My mother, Nancy, was the first to reply. She sent a photo. It was a selfie of her holding a martini glass, the blue water of the Atlantic Ocean in the background. She was on a yacht in Miami. "The old man is finally dead." Her text read, "Good. Do not expect me to come back to that depressing town. We are on the boat until Sunday. You have his $1 million stipend. You handle it." My stomach churned. I looked at the next message. "My father, Robert. Just cremate him. It is cheaper and saves land. Don't bother me with the details. I am busy trying to fix the mess you made with the press." Then Olivia, RIP, followed by a smiley face emoji. Finally out of debt. I let the phone slip from my fingers. It hit the floor with a dull thud. My heart felt colder than the rain pounding on the roof. They weren't just ungrateful, they were inhuman. Even in death, he was nothing more to them than a nuisance they were glad to be rid of. Thursday morning arrived, gray and wet. St. Jude's Chapel was a cavernous space designed to hold 200 mourners. The wooden pews stretched back in long, orderly rows, polished and waiting. At 10 o'clock sharp, the heavy oak doors closed. The room was empty. There were no flowers from the community, scared off by the smear campaign. There were no cousins, no aunts, no uncles. There was no weeping widow. There was only me. I stood at the front of the aisle, wearing my army dress blues. The dark blue fabric was stiff and immaculate. The gold stripes on the sleeves caught the dim light. My medals weighed heavy on my chest, clinking softly as I breathed. I stood at the position of attention next to the casket, which was draped in the American flag. The silence in the room was suffocating. It pressed against my eardrums, louder than any scream. The only sound was the rain drumming a relentless, lonely beat on the metal roof of the chapel. Tap, tap, tap. I looked at the empty seats. I imagined my father sitting in the front row, pretending to care. I imagined my mother crying fake tears into a silk handkerchief. But their absence was a more honest tribute to who they really were. The priest, an old man who had known Arthur for years, looked at me with pity in his eyes. He shortened the service. There was no need for a sermon about family values when the evidence of their failure was echoing in the empty hall. We moved to the cemetery. The rain had turned the Alabama red clay into slick mud. The gravediggers stood back respectfully as I approached the open hole. The casket had been lowered. It sat at the bottom, a rectangle of honor in the dark earth. I picked up the shovel. The handle was wet and slippery. I didn't wait for the workers. I drove the blade into the pile of wet dirt. It was heavy, messy work. Mud splattered onto my polished dress shoes. Sweat mixed with the rain running down my face, stinging my eyes. 1 shovel. For the father who raised them. 2 shovels. For the grandfather who paid their debts. 3 shovels. For the man they left to die alone. I worked until my arms burned and my breath came in ragged gasps. When the grave was filled, when the mound was rounded and complete, I dropped the shovel. I stood at the head of the grave. The wind whipped through the trees, creating a whistling sound that felt like the mournful notes of taps. I snapped my hand up in a sharp, crisp salute. My fingers touched the brim of my cover. I held it for a long count of 3. "Mission accomplished, Commander," I whispered to the wet earth. "You are relieved of duty." I dropped my hand. I turned on my heel, performing a perfect about-face. I walked away from the grave, my boots sinking into the mud. I didn't look back. I wasn't just walking away from a cemetery. I was walking away from the people who shared my blood. I left them there, buried in the past with the grandfather they didn't deserve. I was alone. But as I walked toward the gray horizon, I felt a strange, steel-like strength hardening in my chest. The mourning was over. The judgment was about to begin. 3 weeks after the funeral, the rain in Alabama had finally stopped, replaced by a suffocating humidity that clung to your skin. I received a summons from Attorney Harlan. It wasn't a request. It was a formal legal demand for my presence at his firm, located on the top floor of the Wells Fargo Tower, the tallest building in downtown Birmingham. My ears popped as the high-speed elevator shot up to the 34th floor. When the doors slid open, I stepped into a lobby that smelled of mahogany and old money. Harlan was waiting for me. He was an older man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many family feuds. Today, however, he looked at me differently. It wasn't the pitying look he had given me at the empty chapel. It was a look of profound respect, mixed with a hint of nervous excitement. "Please, sit down, Miss Mosley," Harlan said, gesturing to a leather chair facing his massive desk. I sat, keeping my back straight, hands folded in my lap. "Is this about the stipend? My mother is already threatening to sue the estate for a larger share of the $1 million. Harlan smiled, a thin, enigmatic expression. "We will get to your mother in a moment. But first, we have to execute the final protocol." He pressed a button on his desk. A large flat-screen monitor on the wall flickered to life. It was black and white security footage. I recognized the date stamp in the corner. Thursday, 10 o'clock in the morning. It was the interior of St. Jude's Chapel. On the screen, the pews were empty, just rows and rows of vacant wood. In the center stood a single solitary figure in an army dress blue uniform, saluting a flag-draped coffin. Me. "Arthur left a classified order," Harlan explained, his voice trembling slightly. It was a conditional codicil to his last will and testament. The instruction was simple: access the security feed of the funeral. Verify attendance. If, and only if, a blood relative stood by his grave, was I authorized to open the red file. Harlan turned his chair and placed his thumb against a biometric scanner on a steel safe built into the wall. Beep. Click. Hiss. The heavy door swung open. He pulled out a thick folder bound in crimson leather. It looked heavy. "The will I read at the house? The one with the $1 million stipend?" Harlan placed the red folder on the desk. "That was a decoy. A psychological test to see if greed would outweigh loyalty. Your family failed." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. "I don't understand." "This is the real will," Harlan said. He put on his reading glasses and opened the document. "I, Arthur Hannett, hereby declare, only the soldier who stands the watch when no one is looking deserves to hold the command." Harlan looked up at me. "He knew they wouldn't come, Jada. He bet his entire legacy on the fact that you would be the only one." He cleared his throat and continued reading. "Therefore, I name Jada Mosley as the sole and absolute beneficiary of the Hinault estate." "Sole?" I whispered. The word felt too big for the room. "Everything," Harlan confirmed. He began to flip through the pages of the asset inventory. It was a list that seemed to go on forever. Item 1. The Hinault Luxury Hotel Group, consisting of 55-star properties across North America. Item 2. The La Pearl Resort and Spa in Maui, Hawaii, including the land rights. Item 3. Controlling interest in 3 commercial real estate conglomerates in New York and Chicago. Item 4. A diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds. Harlan closed the folder. He looked me dead in the eye. We finished the valuation this morning, Jada. The total estimated value of the estate you now own is $4.2 billion. The room spun. I gripped the arms of the leather chair to keep from falling off the face of the earth. $4.2 billion. I was a sergeant making $30,000 a year. I clipped coupons to buy groceries. I drove a truck that needed a new transmission. And my family? I asked, my voice barely a squeak. Harlan flipped to the very last page of the document. His face hardened. This is the disinheritance clause. Arthur was very specific. He dictated this part himself. Harlan read the text, and I could hear my grandfather's voice in every syllable. To my son Robert, my daughter Nancy, and their offspring. You chose to abandon me in life, and you chose to abandon me in death. Therefore, you are legally severed from this family. You shall receive $0 and 0 cents. Furthermore, you are hereby permanently enjoined from using the name Hanot for any commercial purpose, loan application, or social status. You are strangers to this estate. I sat there, the silence of the skyscraper wrapping around me. Arthur hadn't just given me money. He had given me a nuclear weapon. He had anticipated their greed. He knew they would skip the funeral to go on vacation, thinking they had secured $1 million payout. He had let them dig their own graves, and now he had handed me the shovel to bury them. What are your instructions, Miss Mosley? Harlan asked, picking up a pen. Do we notify them? I looked out the window at the city of Birmingham stretched out below me. Somewhere down there, in a rented apartment, my parents were probably already spending money they didn't have, waiting for a check that would never come. I thought about the hot dog on the bench. I thought about the empty chapel. I thought about the text message. Just cremate him. The nausea faded. The shock receded. In its place, a cold, steel resolve settled in my chest. I wasn't just a sergeant anymore. I was the commander now. Freeze everything, I said, my voice steady and sharp. Cut off the stipend immediately, and send the eviction notices for any property they are currently occupying that is owned by the trust. I stood up and smoothed the front of my shirt. They wanted nothing to do with him, I said. So that is exactly what they are going to get. Nothing. The press release from the Hanot legal team hit the wires at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Monday. By 7 o'clock, it was the lead story on every major financial news network in America. The headline was irresistible. Poverty-stricken soldier inherits $4 billion empire, a modern American fairy tale. My face, stoic and unsmiling in my official army portrait, was plastered across television screens from Times Square to Los Angeles. Next to it was the image of Arthur Hanot, revealed posthumously as the undercover billionaire who had lived in a shack while building a kingdom. My family, however, missed the morning news. They were too busy living a lie in Miami. They were standing at the front desk of a 5-star oceanfront resort, attempting to check out. My father, Robert, slapped his Black American Express card onto the marble counter with the arrogance of a king. Keep the receipt, he told the clerk. We are in a rush. The clerk swiped the card. She frowned. She swiped it again. I am sorry, sir, she said, her voice polite but firm. The card has been declined. The issuer reports that the account has been frozen due to suspected fraud. Fraud? Robert laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Try the Visa. Declined. Try the MasterCard. Declined. Panic began to set in. Behind them, in the lobby seating area, the massive flat-screen TV was tuned to Fox Business. The anchor was speaking excitedly. And in a shocking twist, the late Arthur Hanot has disinherited his entire biological family, leaving his estimated $4.2 billion fortune solely to his granddaughter, Sergeant Jada Mosley. My mother, Nancy, looked up at the screen. She saw my face. She heard the words, $4.2 billion. Then she heard the words, disinherited. Her knees buckled. She didn't just faint for dramatic effect. Her body simply shut down under the weight of the money she had just lost. She hit the lobby floor with a thud, right next to her Louis Vuitton luggage that she could no longer pay to transport. They drove back to Alabama like maniacs. They must have broken every speed limit across 3 state lines. They arrived at my front gate, Arthur's old house, just as the sun was rising over the humidity-soaked trees. I was drinking coffee on the porch. I'd been expecting them. Their arrival was a pathetic spectacle. The sleek rental cars screeched to a halt on the gravel, kicking up dust. Doors flew open, out spilled the Mosley clan. But the arrogance was gone. The designer clothes were wrinkled and stained with sweat from a 12-hour drive. Their hair was matted. Their eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with red circles that could have been from grief, but I knew were from the sheer terror of poverty. They didn't march up the driveway this time. They ran. They stumbled. Robert, the man who had slapped me in a French restaurant less than a week ago, threw himself onto the grass. He literally dropped to his knees, throwing his arms up toward the porch like a revivalist preacher. "Jida!" he wailed, tears streaming down his face. "Jida, baby! Daddy is home! Oh, thank God you are safe!" He crawled forward on his knees, ruining his suit pants on the wet grass. "I saw the news, honey. I knew it. I knew you were the special one. I always told your mother, Jada is the one who will bring glory to this family." Nancy pushed past him, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. She looked deranged. "Jada, sweetheart," she sobbed, clutching the porch railing. "Please, open the door. Mommy loves you. I am so sorry about what I said. It was the medication. You know I have been depressed. The pills made me crazy. I didn't mean a word of it." Behind them, Olivia and Ethan stood with their heads down, looking like kicked puppies. Aunt Patricia was wringing her hands, muttering prayers. I set my coffee mug down on the railing. I didn't have security guards. I didn't have a weapon in my hand. I didn't need one. I walked down the steps, stopping on the bottom stair. I looked down at them. I looked at my father, groveling in the dirt. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a tumor. "Who are you people looking for?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. "We are looking for you," Robert cried, scrambling to stand up but stumbling back down. "We are looking for our daughter. We are looking for our family." I shook my head slowly. "My family died last Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning at St. Jude's Chapel," I said. I waited for them. I stood by the casket and I waited for just one of them to show up and hold my hand. But nobody came. "But we didn't know," Aunt Patricia shrieked from the back. "We are blood, Jada. You cannot turn your back on blood." I laughed then. It was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. "Blood," I repeated. "You are not blood. You are cancer. You are a malignant growth that attached itself to this family to feed off a good man until he died. And now..." I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the time. "Now I have surgically removed the tumor." I held the phone up so they could see the screen. "I am giving you 3 minutes," I said. 3 minutes to get off my private property. If you are still here at 7:15, the sheriff's deputies, who are currently idling just down the road, will arrest every single one of you for criminal trespassing and harassment." As if on cue, the wail of sirens began to rise in the distance, cutting through the morning air. The color drained from Robert's face. He looked at me, searching for a trace of the little girl he used to ignore. He found only the steel gaze of a billionaire CEO. You wouldn't," he whispered. "Try me," I said. The sirens got louder. Self-preservation kicked in. The tears stopped instantly. The love evaporated. "You bitch!" Robert spat, scrambling to his feet. "You cold-hearted bitch! You will rot in hell for this." "Let's go! Move!" Nancy screamed, shoving Olivia toward the cars. They scrambled back into their vehicles like cockroaches scattering when the lights turn on. Engines roared, gravel sprayed. They peeled out of the driveway, cursing my name, fleeing before the law could catch them. I watched them go until the dust settled. Then I turned around. I walked back up the stairs to the porch. I picked up my coffee mug. I turned the lock on the front door. Click. It was the sound of a vault closing, the sound of a chapter ending, the sound of absolute, beautiful silence. The alarm clock buzzed at 5 o'clock in the morning. I didn't slap the snooze button. I sat up, placed my feet on the hardwood floor, and took a deep breath. Old habits die hard, and the best ones don't die at all. I was no longer an active duty sergeant, but the discipline remained. As the old saying goes, discipline equals freedom. I walked into the kitchen and brewed a pot of black coffee. The smell filled the small wooden house, the same house my grandfather, Arthur Hannett, had lived in for 30 years. Everyone expected me to move. When the wire transfer hit my account, confirming a balance of over $4 billion, the real estate agents circled like sharks. They showed me brochures for mansions in Beverly Hills, penthouses in Manhattan, and private islands in the Caribbean. I threw them all in the trash. I stayed right here in Birmingham. I bought the land surrounding the cabin to ensure privacy, and I renovated the structure. I reinforced the foundation, replaced the leaking roof with copper, and installed a security system that would rival the Pentagon. But the soul of the house remained. I kept Arthur's old armchair by the window. I kept his collection of history books. I didn't buy a yacht. Instead, I established the Arthur Hannott Foundation. On the kitchen table, spread out under the morning light, were the blueprints for our first major project, the barracks. It wasn't a military base. It was a community of 500 high-quality tiny homes designed specifically for homeless veterans. We were giving them what my family had denied Arthur: dignity, a roof overhead, and a community that wouldn't leave them behind. I took a sip of coffee and looked out the window. The sun was just beginning to burn off the Alabama mist. I thought about the people who used to clutter this driveway with their leased luxury cars. News travels fast in a small town. I heard that my parents, Robert and Nancy, had been forced to sell the colonial house in the suburbs. The bank foreclosed on it before they could even list it properly. They were now living in a 2-bedroom apartment complex on the south side of town, the kind of place where the walls are paper thin and the neighbors argue until 3 in the morning. Without Arthur's secret credit cards to fund their lifestyle, they had turned on each other. The love they claimed to have was as leased as their BMWs. Once the payments stopped, the relationship was repossessed. And Olivia, the cousin who had mocked an old man for being slow, she had deleted her social media accounts after the public backlash became too severe. No brand wanted to work with a bully. Last I heard, she was working the morning shift at a diner off the interstate. She spends her days serving eggs and refilling coffee for truckers, forced to smile and be polite for a $2 tip. It is a harsh punishment, to go from thinking you are royalty to scrubbing ketchup stains off a laminate table. But life has a way of balancing the scales. They chose money over loyalty, and now they have neither. I finished my coffee and went to the bedroom to get dressed. I stood before the full-length mirror. I wasn't wearing my fatigues or my dress blues. I was wearing a tailored black suit, sharp and professional. I buttoned the jacket. I looked at my reflection. The face staring back had changed. The anger that had fueled me for so long was gone. The tension in my jaw had relaxed. I realized then that the greatest inheritance Arthur left me wasn't the $4 billion. It wasn't the hotels or the resorts. It was the lesson of honor. He taught me that character is what you do when the lights are off. He taught me that you can stand tall even when you are wearing a flannel shirt from Goodwill. And you can be small and pathetic even when you are wearing a tuxedo. He taught me that loyalty isn't a transaction. It is a lifestyle. I grabbed my keys, not to a Ford truck anymore, but to a reliable, armored SUV, and headed out the door. The drive to the cemetery was peaceful. The late afternoon sun was turning the Alabama red clay into a deep, rich gold. I parked the car and walked up the hill. The grass had grown back over the scar in the earth where we had buried him. The headstone was simple, just as he requested. No titles of chairman or founder. Just his name, his rank, and the dates. Arthur Hannott, Commander, U.S. Navy. Beloved father and grandfather. I knelt down in the grass. The air smelled of rain and honeysuckle. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out 2 things. The first was a single white rose. I placed it gently against the cold stone. The second was my new business card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. It read, Jada Mosley, CEO, Hannott Industries. I propped the card up against the rose. Report to Commander, I whispered, my voice steady and clear in the quiet air. The hostile elements have been neutralized. The squad has been purified. The legacy is secure. A breeze rustled through the oak trees, shaking the leaves. It felt like a hand resting on my shoulder. Mission accomplished, Grandpa, I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. You are relieved. I stood up and brushed the grass from my knees. I performed one final slow salute, not for the flag, but for the man. I turned my back on the grave and walked toward the sunset. The wind caught my short hair, blowing it back from my face. My chest felt light, unburdened by the weight of anger or the need for validation. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was fighting a war. I didn't feel like I had to prove myself to anyone. I walked to my car, opened the door, and drove away into the golden light. I was finally free. Looking back at this operation, I realized that my family made a fatal calculation. They thought wealth was measured by the car you drive or the logo on your handbag. But Arthur taught me the ultimate truth. Character is the only currency that doesn't depreciate. Real wealth isn't about what you have in the bank. It is about who shows up for you when you have nothing to offer but your company. If you chase money at the expense of your soul, you are already bankrupt. But if you hold on to your honor, even when it is hard, even when you are standing alone in the rain, that is a richness no one can ever take away from you. Be the person who stays when everyone else leaves. Now, I have a question for you. If the cameras were turned off and there was no reward in sight, would you have stood by the commander? It is a tough question, but an important one. If this story touched your heart, or if you believe that loyalty still matters in this world, please honor us by hitting that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Join our squad. Let's build a community that values character over currency. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know your story. Dismissed.